Monday, August 14th, 1980. A tip had come in that would lead detectives down a twisted and tragic path. The call pointed them to a West Los Angeles home, a house that had been the scene of marital chaos for months. When the police arrived, they found something that didn't quite sit right: two bodies, lying lifeless in a bedroom. As the details unraveled, a story emerged of jealousy, control, and a twisted desire for revenge. Dorothy Stratten, the once promising Playboy playmate, was gone, and her estranged husband, Paul Snider, had left behind a trail of violence that led to a shocking end. But the cameras told a different story, one of lies, manipulation, and a deadly obsession. Dorothy Stratten was born on February 28, 1960, in Vancouver, Canada, to Simon and Nellie Hoog Stratten, immigrants from the Netherlands. Growing up in the quiet suburbs of Vancouver, Dorothy was a cheerful and compassionate child. She was the youngest of three siblings, and her family quickly noticed her sweet nature and friendly demeanor. Friends from high school described her as the type of person who could make anyone feel welcome. Despite her modest beginnings, Dorothy always dreamed of something bigger. While attending Centennial High School, she worked part-time at a local Dairy Queen, where she interacted with customers and earned extra money, just like any typical teenager. She was known for her infectious laugh and her genuine kindness, always ready to lend a hand or share a joke. At the age of 18, Dorothy's life took a dramatic turn. While working at Dairy Queen, she crossed paths with Paul Snider, a 26-year-old club promoter. Paul, who had a reputation for managing women, quickly saw potential in Dorothy. He convinced her to pose for nude photographs, a decision that would forever alter the course of her life. At the time, Dorothy was under the legal age of majority in British Columbia, and she had to convince her mother to sign the necessary model release forms. This was the start of her career in the adult entertainment industry. In the summer of 1978, her photos made their way to Playboy magazine, and before long, she was invited to Los Angeles to try out for the magazine's famed Playmate competition. By August 1979, just a year after she first caught Paul's eye, Dorothy was named Playmate of the Month for Playboy. Her beauty, combined with her natural charm, quickly made her a standout. Her striking looks and engaging personality led to even greater opportunities in the entertainment world. Dorothy's rise to fame was swift. She moved to Los Angeles, leaving behind her family and the life she once knew. She soon found herself working as a Playboy bunny at the Playboy Club in Century City, Los Angeles, where her presence lit up the room. The city, a world away from her humble Vancouver beginnings, was the new stage where Dorothy's dreams could unfold. As her career took off, Dorothy's life continued to blossom. By 1980, she was crowned Playmate of the Year. This recognition was a career-defining moment that signaled her rapid rise in the entertainment industry. She became a fixture in Playboy, gracing its pages and appearing in various television shows, including episodes of Buck Rogers and Fantasy Island. Despite her success, Dorothy was more than just a pretty face. She had bigger dreams of acting and wanted to be taken seriously as an actress, not just as a model. Paul seemed like the perfect match for Dorothy in the beginning. He was charming, full of confidence, and offered her the support she needed to navigate the competitive world of modeling and entertainment. It didn't take long for Dorothy to trust him, and before long, Paul had become more than just her manager. He became her husband. They married in 1979, just a year after Dorothy had become Playboy's Playmate of the Month. Paul assumed the role of her manager and began handling many aspects of her career. At first, it seemed like a dream partnership. Dorothy was becoming more successful by the day, and Paul was right there, guiding her every step of the way. To outsiders, they appeared to be the perfect couple, with Dorothy's career flourishing under Paul's watchful eye. However, over time, Dorothy began to notice changes in their relationship that she couldn't ignore. As their marriage progressed, cracks began to show. Despite the glamorous life Dorothy was building, the pressure of their personal and professional relationship started taking a toll. Paul became increasingly controlling, not just over Dorothy's career but over her life. He was constantly by her side, trying to manage every aspect of her time, even when it wasn't necessary. This suffocating presence led to tension, and Dorothy started to feel trapped. She no longer had the freedom she had once enjoyed before meeting him. Friends and colleagues, including Playboy founder Hugh Hefner, began noticing the red flags in Paul's behavior. Hefner, who had high hopes for Dorothy's career, privately warned her that Paul's possessiveness and controlling nature might damage her professional and personal life. Other people close to Dorothy, like actress Roseanne Caton, also expressed concern about Paul's behavior, but Dorothy remained optimistic. She believed that with enough love and patience, Paul could change. Dorothy's hopeful nature kept her in the relationship longer than she perhaps should have stayed. In her heart, she still wanted to make her marriage work, despite the warning signs. She convinced herself that Paul was just trying to protect her and help her succeed. But as time went on, it became clear that Paul's insecurities were getting the better of him, and Dorothy was paying the price. Even though she continued to rise in her career, she was sinking deeper into a controlling and oppressive marriage where her every move was scrutinized. By the time Dorothy began to find success in Hollywood and beyond, her personal life with Paul was beginning to crumble. The facade of the perfect couple started to unravel as Paul's jealousy and possessiveness took center stage. Dorothy's dreams of becoming a successful actress were often overshadowed by Paul's behavior, and the more she tried to distance herself from him, the tighter his grip seemed to become. Though the marriage began with promise, it soon became clear that Paul's influence on Dorothy was far from positive, and as she would soon realize, her dreams of breaking free would become even more complicated. The financial strain that accompanied Dorothy's rising fame and Paul's management of her career started to take its toll. While Dorothy worked tirelessly, balancing her job at Playboy with her acting roles, Paul did little to contribute. Instead, he continued to drain Dorothy's finances, making reckless decisions and avoiding any real responsibility. The money she earned, much of it hard-earned from her modeling career, was often mismanaged or spent without her consent. Paul's lack of responsibility and constant demands for money caused Dorothy a great deal of stress. What should have been a time of celebration and success for her turned into a nightmare of financial instability and constant worry. The emotional weight of their marriage became unbearable. While Dorothy's career continued to flourish, her personal life was falling apart. Paul's once charming demeanor had faded, and he began to show signs of emotional manipulation and control. At first, it was subtle comments about her appearance, questions about where she was and who she was with. Over time, these behaviors grew more intense. Dorothy felt as though she could do nothing right. Paul's jealousy became overwhelming, and his outbursts grew more frequent. His criticisms turned into emotional abuse, making Dorothy feel as though she was constantly walking on eggshells. What had once seemed like a fairy tale romance now felt like a dark, suffocating trap. The situation only worsened when Paul's emotional abuse escalated to physical violence. Dorothy, who had always been hopeful and optimistic, began to realize that the man she had married was no longer the person she had fallen in love with. Paul's temper became unpredictable, and he would lash out at her over the smallest things. The relationship that had started with so much promise had transformed into a nightmare of fear and helplessness. Dorothy found herself trapped in a marriage that she no longer recognized. Despite the escalating abuse, Dorothy tried everything she could to save her marriage. She sought therapy, hoping that with professional help, things could improve. She prayed for a change, holding on to the belief that Paul could turn things around. She continued to love him, perhaps hoping that the man she once knew would emerge from the shadows of his destructive behavior. But no matter how hard she tried, Paul's behavior only grew worse. The emotional scars and physical toll were becoming too much for her to handle. Eventually, Dorothy had to face the truth. Her marriage to Paul was beyond repair. No amount of love or therapy could undo the damage that had been done. As much as she wanted to make it work, Dorothy realized that she was fighting a battle she couldn't win. The man who had once promised to support her dreams had become the source of her greatest pain. The reality of her situation began to sink in. Leaving was the only way she could ever find peace. But as the abuse worsened, so did the fear that leaving might be too late. By March 1980, Dorothy Stratten's life had become a constant battle. The emotional and physical abuse from Paul Snider had grown so severe that Dorothy knew she couldn't take it anymore. For the first time, she made a bold decision. She took legal action. She filed for a restraining order against Paul, a clear sign that she was finally ready to take control of her life. This was not an easy decision for her, but Dorothy had reached her breaking point. She couldn't keep living in fear, trapped in a marriage that had become more dangerous every day. The restraining order was her attempt to break free from Paul's control and protect herself from the man who had once been her husband and manager. Dorothy wasn't alone in this decision. Her family, who had always been supportive, rallied around her, urging her to take the necessary steps to get away from Paul. They could see how much pain she was in and wanted to help her escape the toxic relationship. Her family's support was a lifeline during this difficult time. They offered her advice, comfort, and a safe place to turn when things seemed unbearable. They knew Dorothy had to get out before it was too late. Despite the love and care from her family, however, Paul's manipulation continued. He was not willing to let Dorothy go easily. He used every tactic to make her feel guilty, to convince her that he could change, and to keep her in the relationship. As Dorothy tried to move forward, the legal system failed her. Although she had filed for the restraining order, it was eventually dropped. Paul's manipulative behavior worked to undermine her confidence, and the pressure from him was too much to handle. Dorothy was left feeling powerless, trapped in a cycle that seemed impossible to break. The restraining order was supposed to be her first step to freedom, but instead, it became another reminder of just how difficult it was to escape Paul's grip. The frustration and desperation Dorothy felt during this time were overwhelming. She had made the choice to seek help, but the road to freedom was far from simple. The abuse, both emotional and physical, had left deep scars. Dorothy was trying to move forward, but it was clear that leaving Paul wouldn't be as easy as filing legal papers or asking for help from family. The more she tried to break free, the more Paul worked to pull her back into his toxic control. Dorothy's journey to escape was only beginning, and each step she took forward seemed to lead her into even more danger. By June 1980, Dorothy Stratten had reached her breaking point. The emotional and physical abuse she had endured for over a year had worn her down. Despite her best efforts to make the marriage work, Dorothy could no longer ignore the painful reality. She had to get out. She made the decision to file for divorce, a step that would change everything in her life. Filing for divorce was not just a legal move. It was her last attempt to break free from Paul's control and manipulation once and for all. She couldn't continue living in fear, and she couldn't allow her dreams to be crushed by a man who no longer respected her or her autonomy. Paul, however, wasn't willing to let go so easily. His reaction to Dorothy's decision was explosive. He was furious. Paul's anger and obsession with Dorothy only grew stronger after she filed for divorce. He couldn't stand the thought of losing her, and his threats became more intense and more frequent. Dorothy had hoped that filing for divorce would be the first step toward a better life, but instead, it seemed to fuel Paul's need to hold on to her. His controlling behavior became even more evident as he refused to accept the reality of the situation. Instead of understanding Dorothy's need for independence, Paul's obsession turned toxic. He began to show more signs of desperation, trying to manipulate and control her even more. His behavior was erratic, and he made it clear that he was unwilling to let her go without a fight. His threats grew darker, and Dorothy realized just how dangerous the situation had become. The man who had once promised to love and support her was now a constant source of fear. Dorothy's decision to file for divorce, which she had hoped would be her path to freedom, only seemed to drive Paul further into his obsession. This period of high tension was the calm before the storm. Dorothy had made her choice, but the road ahead was filled with uncertainty. Her efforts to reclaim her life were met with resistance, and it became clear that Paul was not going to let her go without a tragic confrontation. As the days went on, Dorothy knew she had to prepare for the worst, but the question was whether she could get away before it was too late. On the morning of August 14, 1980, Dorothy Stratten made her way to Paul Snider's house for what would turn out to be her final meeting with him. At this point, she was trying to finalize their divorce and discuss the settlement details. She had no idea that this visit would be the last time she would ever see the light of day. Dorothy arrived at the house, likely hoping to keep things civil, despite the tense and abusive history of their relationship. She had spent years trying to keep the peace, but this meeting was different. She was determined to move on with her life, even if it meant facing the painful end of her marriage. What happened next would change everything. Later in the afternoon, in the privacy of the home they had once shared, Paul shot Dorothy at point-blank range with a shotgun. He didn't give her any chance to escape. The moment was over in seconds. Dorothy, just 20 years old, was taken in an instant by the man who had once claimed to love her. Her life, which had so much promise and potential, was tragically cut short. But the horror didn't end there. After killing Dorothy, Paul turned the shotgun on himself. He ended his own life in a tragic act of suicide. He had made sure that he would take the life of the woman who wanted to leave him, and then he chose to end his own life as well. Paul's actions were the result of his obsessive need to control and possess Dorothy, even in death. It was clear that he could not bear the thought of her moving on without him. That evening, Paul's roommates, who had been away earlier in the day, returned to the house. They saw Dorothy's car parked outside and assumed that the couple had reconciled. But when they tried to check on them, they found the door to Paul's bedroom closed. Fearing that something might be wrong, the roommates entered the room, and what they discovered sent shockwaves through the entire world. They found the bodies of Dorothy and Paul lying lifeless. The scene was grim and shocking. The tragedy of Dorothy Stratten's death hit the world like a bombshell. She had been a rising star, full of promise, and her death robbed the world of someone who had so much more to offer. It was a brutal, shocking end to her life, a life that had barely started but had already been marred by violence and control. Paul's death meant that he would never face trial for his actions. While some might have seen it as a form of justice, the reality was that it left many feeling conflicted. The police, along with everyone who had followed the case, knew that the true resolution of the case, seeing Paul held accountable for his actions, was now impossible. His death robbed the court of a chance to decide his fate, leaving no opportunity for Dorothy to get justice in a legal sense. Law enforcement and the public had mixed feelings about Paul's tragic end. On one hand, Paul's death meant that he could no longer hurt anyone else. His violence and obsession had already led to the brutal murder of Dorothy, and with him gone, there was at least a sense of closure in that he could never cause further harm. But at the same time, many felt the loss of a formal resolution. Dorothy's family and friends wanted to see Paul face the consequences for what he did to her, and his sudden death left a lot of questions unanswered. Could justice have been fully served if Paul had lived? That was something that haunted many who were involved in the case. For Dorothy's family, the closure was both bittersweet and painful. While they were relieved that Paul would never hurt anyone again, it didn't change the fact that Dorothy was gone. No matter how the case ended, no amount of justice could bring their daughter and sister back. Her life, full of potential and dreams, was taken away too soon, and nothing could fix that. They had lost someone who had meant so much to them, and while Paul's death ended the cycle of abuse, it didn't ease the deep sorrow of their loss. The resolution of the case left a mix of emotions in its wake: relief that the danger had ended, sorrow over Dorothy's untimely death, and frustration over the way things ended. Dorothy Stratten's story ended tragically, and though there was some comfort in knowing Paul could no longer cause harm, it was hard to ignore the painful reality that no amount of justice could change what had happened. Her family would carry the weight of that pain forever. Dorothy Stratten's story is a heartbreaking tragedy, but it also serves as a powerful reminder of the dangers that can come from toxic relationships and unchecked obsession. We often hear about warning signs in relationships, but Dorothy's life shows just how important it is to recognize them early and take them seriously. Her death wasn't just the result of one moment of violence, but the culmination of months of emotional and physical abuse that escalated over time. It's a tragedy that could have been prevented if the signs were addressed earlier. We must all be more aware of the warning signs in relationships and recognize when someone is at risk. Domestic violence doesn't always look the way we expect it to, and sometimes those suffering feel trapped or unable to escape. Dorothy's story shows just how critical it is to provide support to those who are struggling in harmful relationships. It's not just about the victim, it's about the community surrounding them, the family and friends who can offer help when they see someone in need. We must do more to support those who are vulnerable, to offer them a safe space to speak out, and to help them take the necessary steps to break free before it's too late. Reflecting on Dorothy's life and death, we have to ask ourselves, what could have been done differently? Could Dorothy have gotten out sooner? Could someone have stepped in to help her before the situation became fatal? These are tough questions, but they're questions we need to answer as a society. How can we, as individuals, family members, or friends, better protect those who are vulnerable to domestic violence? What steps can we take to make sure that no one else has to suffer the way Dorothy did? Let's honor Dorothy's memory by raising awareness, by offering help to those in need, and by taking action when we see something that's not right. It's time to change the way we look at and respond to domestic violence. Dorothy's story might be over, but we can still learn from it and make sure that her tragedy leads to change. Let's make a difference.